Hey, greetings there, fellow maker. It's Bill here today, live in the shop. I want to thank our Prop Tarts for joining me today. We're going to be talking about some molds that I made 5 years ago and comparing them to some molds I made more recently. Now, the molds I made a long time ago are the molds for this. This is the Phalanx. No, this is not the Phalanx. This is the Eagle, the N7 Eagle from Mass Effect 3. Made this a long time ago, and I made some silicone molds. This is the master that I ended up painting. I made some silicone molds of this so I could make copies. I also made a conversion kit. Now, this is all on punishprops.com. We've got a blog article that I wrote way long ago. You can go check that out. But in short, I never made the Phalanx version of this for myself. So I dug some of these old molds out and started using them and realized how terrible they were. So today, I'm going to critique them, and hopefully you guys can learn a little bit about some of the shortcomings that I ran into when I was making those original molds. And then I will compare those old ones to some new ones so you can see an example of some of the improvements that I've made. Also, before we get started, if you guys are looking for more mold making advice, everything I've learned over the past 5 or 6 years of mold making we put together on our website. So if you go to punishprops.com, go to techniques, and go to molding and casting. Every project that includes molding and casting is on there. A whole bunch of materials, silicone, everything that you need to know. Plus this giant playlist of molding and casting videos. All the basics, everything you need to know to get started is right there. Jump on over, watch the whole series, you'll be good to go. This will give you a huge boost, much quicker than it took me to learn how to get better molds. So there you go. Go check that out if you have mold making questions. And on to the critique. So what I have here is the set of molds. Now I built this in pieces to make it, I thought, would be easier to cast them. So there are different parts. For example, this is the handle of the gun. You can see like so, the handle there. And then this part is the top of the gun right there. And then let's see, the little handle guard, this goes down on the bottom there. And then the most terrible is this sort of main body part, and that's this big fella right here. So let's start with this. This is one of the very first silicone molds I ever made, and there are quite a few things that went wrong. You can see two different colors. That's because I didn't mix up enough silicone the first time, and I had to mix up the second batch, and I didn't mix it in the same ratio. Now the mold turned out fine, but you can definitely tell that's something I goofed up on. Now a couple of other things that I didn't do great are the edges here. You can see they're kind of rounded over. Now on the outer perimeter, that's not as big of a deal, but when it comes to the sort of inner perimeter, where the mold touches down with the master, that can be an issue. When you compress the two halves of the mold together, it can cause the edges to shear and not line up properly. So that's definitely something I goofed on. By comparison, here's a new mold. Looks very clean, and all of these edges here, where the mold touches down, are perpendicular to the surface that they are touching. So that when you compress the two mold halves together, like so, they don't shear apart. So that's an example of something I totally goofed on. Something else you'd probably notice is that there are a ton of registration marks on this mold. Not the case with this mold. I only made a couple, and you can see that they really kind of are spread out and kind of chewed up and gross. Something else that's blatantly clear is that I had to cut this mold open, which means when I did the two-part mold, I didn't spray on enough mold release, so the two halves stuck together and I had to cut it. Now I could have done a much better job of cutting it. It's not the end of the world if that happens, but in this case I did a very poor job at cutting it, and it's really mangled. So what ends up happening is the pieces, when you cast them, the seam is really, really gross. So the part that I cast out of this requires a ton of filling. So I've been working on this casting a bit. This is some Bondo that's in there. You can see this piece right here, there's a kind of a hole there where the mold just kind of misaligned, and when the resin went in there it looks all terrible and gross. So that's another thing I've learned in the ensuing years between this mold here and this mold here, which is about 4 years and at least a couple hundred molds worth of experience. Some other things that I've learned since I made these molds is that the vents need to be planned much better. So on this mold here, there's a vent in the top, but this here is a horizontal surface, so as the mold or casting material goes in there, it hits right there and bubbles will form there. Now you can sort of move the mold around a bit to kind of get those bubbles to come out, but I should have cut a vent there for sure. Also, what else do we have? Another example. This mold, oh, you can see these are really old. Parts of the silicone are just falling off. You can see on this mold here, I didn't really plan the vents very well. There's a vent there that I cut. There's a vent there, and then another one there. If you fill this up with resin, then it will go up to here, but it will pour out right there. So when I cast a copy, I have to plug this with clay or something before I can cast a copy. Also, you can see I cut a vent right there because bubbles would get caught up here. All things that could have been fixed easily if I had planned further ahead. For example, this is the Mr. Handy leg mold. You can see that I planned on a vent at the tip of this leg piece. So that resin goes in, air can escape that way, and there won't get any bubbles trapped in there. Now there's still a little point right there that might catch a little bit of a bubble, but the huge benefit this mold has over this mold is that this one can be pressure cast. So when I made this mold here, I didn't have a degasser to pull the bubbles out of the silicone while it was still liquid. Which means if I put this in a pressure pot, those bubbles will compress and it will deform the casting. So I can't pressure cast this. This newer mold was made, of course you can go watch the Mr. Handy video to go check it out, but it was made, the silicone was degassed. So with these molds, once I pour the resin in there and fill it up, I can put it into the pressure pot while that resin is still a liquid. It compresses any bubbles in that resin, and then once it cures, it stays that way, and they are bubble free. So those are a couple, more than a couple of improvements between this first old mold that I made for this gun here and some of the newer ones that I've made. Now here is kind of an intermediary mold, slightly better. It's held up pretty well. I could probably have used more registration marks along the seam line here, but that's okay. Again though, the vents are kind of a problem. So if we look, the resin fills up this way, but this whole area right here is prone to getting a lot of bubbles. So I probably could have planned that a little bit better. But this is probably a mold I made, I don't know, I made a dozen or two molds to kind of get to this level as I worked along my path to becoming a better and more competent mold maker. So there you go, guys, just a little bit of a critique, a little bit of a lesson on mold making, and hopefully you guys can learn a bit about the mistakes I made early on when I was making some of my very first molds, and sort of jump to the head of the class with your own mold making techniques. Like I said before, we have that whole mold making series on our YouTube channel. Of course, we'll have links to all that below, so you can go check that out. And like I said, again, check out that content before you make your first mold, learn everything you need to know about the basics, and jump straight to the head of the class. Again, you will avoid making some really janky and hideous molds like I did 5 years ago. And then remember that getting good at this sort of stuff takes time, it takes practice, and of course it takes money because silicone isn't cheap. Start small. If you're going to be making 2-part molds, start with small pieces like this for some of your smaller things so you get lots of practice in without totally breaking the bank. Of course, I've taken years and thousands of hours of practice and thousands of dollars of silicone to get to the level where I am now, and I still feel like I have tons and tons left to learn. So don't get frustrated if you feel like you wasted some time and money on learning a new skill, because you can always apply that skill to the next project and the next one, and before you know it, you'll be a super pro at mold making. That's all I have for you guys today. Thanks for checking out the video. Thank you everyone for hanging out with us live over on our Twitch stream. We do these usually Tuesdays at noon if you want to check it out. And of course we'll have our Q&A prop and costume making session on Thursdays at 5, so join us for that. That's all I have for you. Head on out there and, well, learn how to make some molds. See you, gang. Hey, thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you don't miss any of our new weekly prop and costume tutorial videos. For more goodies, head over to our website where you'll find blueprints, tutorial books, articles, and more. We also have a second channel for our Q&A show and extra behind the scenes videos. Thanks again and happy crafting.